Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney Flynn. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. This is your host, Christine Mooney Flynn. Thank you for listening today. And I have somebody that I'm very excited to talk to. Her name is Haley Stewart. She is a writer, speaker, and podcaster. And speaking of writer, she just launched a new book called The Grace of Enough, Pursuing Less and Living More in a Throwaway Culture. She's also a mom of four, a Southern mom of four, which I can identify with because I'm from North Carolina myself. Hello, Haley. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, this is awesome. I've been following you on Instagram for a while. As long as I've been on Instagram, I popped off of Instagram for a couple of years and then came back on a few months ago. But you were one of the first people I started following then. So.
Oh, thank you. I hope I haven't been a disappointment.
No, you haven't. I've been pretty cutthroat about who I've been following, and you've made the cut every time I see something now.
Well, I'm honored.
So you mentioned my microphone just fell. Okay, we're back. It's a sad microphone. I think the screw on it needs to be replaced or tightened. There we go. It just flops over every once in a while. You mentioned that you might have to pop off for a hungry baby. How old is your little one?
She is 5.5 weeks old. So she's coming up on 6 weeks and she's just a little pumpkin.
That's
she's
awesome.
Fantastic.
That's awesome. So do you have four? So is everybody even boys, girls, or?
No, she's our third girl in a row. So our firstborn is a boy and then 3 little girls in a row. He was a little bit devastated that he wasn't getting a baby brother this time. But she's just precious and perfect. He's fallen in love with her, but he says he still would like a brother.
There's always time. There can always be more. My son, actually, we have a boy and 2 girls, and he asked for the 2 daughters have this a birthday within a week of each other, both in July, and he's like, well, I want another kid, and I want the birthday in October, and I would like it to be a boy. I was like, ooh. That's a lot of requests. And he's like, well, you can just ask God. I was like, I can ask God for that. I was like, but that doesn't mean anything really. Oh, well, I think maybe he's a little confused on what prayer might actually be at this point, but you can always.
We all are. It's something we're all figuring out.
Yeah. Ask and ye shall receive. It just might be a no. So as I said before, we started hitting record. I devoured your book. It just came out, right? This past week?
Right. Last Friday.
On your birthday.
Day before my birthday. Mm-hmm.
Happy birthday. Happy book launch. It's very exciting.
Thank you.
A lot of work probably went into that. So it was a huge celebration, I'm sure, or at least a sigh of relief on your birthday.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting process because I did most of the writing last year and then editing in the spring. And then it's kind of been out of my hands for a few months while it's being printed and everything that's happening at the publisher. And so I was just focusing on surviving this pregnancy in 3, triple digit heat in Texas and feeling miserable and then having a baby. And then it's like, oh, I've just come out of this newborn fog a little bit and here's my book. Here it is, everybody. That's right. I wrote a book. It's kind of a weird experience because you do all of the work for it so many months before everybody else gets to see it.
Yeah, actually my husband is a writer and he just got word yesterday that he does not have to touch his latest book anymore. He's done with it, but it doesn't come out until January. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure, and his mind's already on other project. So I'm sure it'll kind of be like, hey, remember this in December? But like, hey, you do have something important coming up next month.
That's right. When I got my copies, I was kind of flipping through going, oh yeah, I did say that. Oh, I kind of like that.
That's good. Yeah, you don't want to read
forgotten.
You don't want to read it and be like, oh my God, I wrote so badly. Why did I write that?
Yeah,
it can often happen.
I didn't. I just kind of flipped through because I was like, I know if I sit down and start reading it carefully, I will come upon a sentence where I go, ooh, I wish I'd said it like this. And I just can't deal with that.
Right.
So I probably never read it again.
Well, I've read it and it was wonderful. I loved that combination of very the anecdotes and then very tactical, practical ways of applying the lessons that you learned in all of this. So it's very cool to read.
You.
And we were in Austin, Texas a few years ago for something and wound up at a farm for dinner one night. And it was like one of those 5-hour dinners that you were talking about. It just brought me back. And I mean, so great imagery. I just really enjoyed the whole thing. So, first question I was just thinking of as I was reading it is what, after this experience happened a couple of years ago, right?
Right. We moved off the farm in, was it 2017 or 2016? I'm getting it all mixed up, but we've been off the farm for almost 2 years.
So then wasn't that right. Long after you left that you started writing the book?
That's right. I guess I took about 6 months after we were off the farm. We'd wrapped up our year. We moved into our house. And then I started writing. So I started writing about 18 months ago.
Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering, I couldn't, because it said I think in 2015 you were on the farm. So I didn't know if that was like early 2015 or what made you feel like you needed to write a book now about all of this, I think was.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because when we, I'm a blogger. And so I was sharing on the blog about this move we were making. We were leaving our life in Florida, where my husband had like a 9-to-5 grind, and we owned a home, and we had sold our house and most of our stuff. We were moving to this farm. And at that point, I had an editor reach out to me and say, hey, would you like to write a book about this? And I turned him down because I felt like I don't know if I want to write a book about this. I haven't experienced this yet. And I don't want the experience to be kind of manipulated into a book, if that makes sense. Like, sure. Kind of like shaping the experience in order to turn it into some kind of narrative that would work for a book. It just didn't seem to make sense to me. So I said, no, like, I'm not ready to write this book. We haven't even gotten to this farm. We might totally hate it and it could be a terrible disaster. So I held off for a while, and then a different editor contacted me, I guess about, thinking back, I think it was about 9 months after we'd moved off the farm. And at that point, I felt like I had this space to kind of reflect on what we learned and to really have something to say about it at that point. Because when you're right in the middle of something, you don't even know what you've learned from the experience yet because you haven't had the time to process it and kind of work it all out in your head. And so then at that point, I started writing.
Got it. Well, and also you had to move. you had to move into a new house. How could you
That's right.
Time to write a book? I liked in there that I love The Hobbit and all those things. So every time I saw any of those references, like, oh, somebody speaks my language. This is awesome. But a lot of it is geared. You're a millennial. I'm a millennial. What do you feel like? For me, I see the me culture started, the me generation, I feel like started a lot of this, and it's set into motion. Do you feel like the millennials are turning the tide or embracing the throwaway culture? Or is it maybe the generations prior to us that are really the cause of pushing this forward still?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's tricky to kind of try to point the finger at one generation or another. I think we are kind of all in this together. But I think that, like, my parents are in the boomer generation, and their experience still had vestiges of some of the things I talk about in the book, like having dinner together as a family and not having so much stuff, having fewer possessions and living simply and spending time together as a family. And some of these things they were still experiencing because there was some left over from the previous generation, if that makes sense. And then I think as a millennial, my family had dinner together most nights, but that was pretty different from most of my friends. And I think that a lot of us grew up not having very many of those vestiges of these practices and habits and virtues. And so we've experienced the lack of it. And I think we're more motivated to swing back in the other direction. So I think that's why things like the life-changing magic of tying up, it's so popular, because we've seen what happened when we went in the other direction of affluence and acquiring and consumerism, and saw, okay, this didn't make my parents happy, the parent generation, this didn't make me satisfied, and so I'm looking for something else. So it's even be outside of Catholic culture, Christian culture, the secular culture too is saying, I know I'm not satisfied, the previous generation wasn't satisfied, so where do we go from here? And are really reaching out for some of those virtues that have fallen by the wayside over the past 100 years or so.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm in my early 30s, and my parents were married, are still married after 40 some years. And my mom did not work outside of the house, and we had dinner together every night. And I know nobody else who had that experience.
Yeah. It's interesting. Even things like relationships and views about marriages and various things, where it's like the last generation held on to some of those things because it's just what people did, but didn't really have any foundation for it. And so as the generations have moved down, it's like we have no foundation for any of that. And we've also felt what it's like to grow up in broken homes and as a culture. And my parents are still married, and I'm so grateful for that. But I think that as the reasons for why, oops, my mic just came undone.
I can still hear you.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. I think that as we've lost our understanding for why we do things and why certain virtues and practices are good and transformative and point us towards the gospel, because we've lost the foundation for that, the practices themselves have fallen out of fashion. So
Sure.
Things like not having more stuff than we need, or having people over for dinner, or building up our communities, all of these things, because we don't really have a foundation for why they're good, they just kind of disappear a little more with each generation. So I think for millennials, we are really experiencing the lack of those things and wanting something different and reaching out for it in different ways. And so I think some of those ways are like decluttering and getting rid of some of our stuff because we know that doesn't make us happy. But I think it's important to delve into the reasons for why that is, because I think that's really where millennials are grasping at straws. We don't really know why having more stuff makes us unhappy, and having less stuff could be beneficial.
Right. Yeah. Without the value, it all becomes arbitrary.
Right.
Why follow that? I've talked about this actually on a recent podcast about being the dangers of being spiritual but not religious. And I grew up, both my parents had been raised Catholic, and as soon as they could get away from it, they did. And so, but they still had the foundations and the morality and the values instilled with them in them from years of being raised in the church. And I think they tried to instill those values in myself and my brother, but without the foundation that the church provides, it really fell flat, because it went as far as, well, my parents are telling me to do this, but what, teenager wants to listen to their parents.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You need the foundations. In the book, you go through and talk about, pretty much each chapter is a different value or a different value set. Since you've left the farm and integrated back into urban life, which of those has kind of been the easiest, hardest to hold on to?
Yeah. I think that the more, now we live in a small house, but it's a house and not a teeny tiny apartment. And so it's easy to just be acquiring stuff all the time, where you realize, how did we get all this stuff in the kids' room? Where did all these toys come from? And so I think that that's something that's trickier when you have space for more things, to continue trying to be really intentional about what you have in your home and not being overwhelmed with stuff. I think also when we were on the farm, my husband was doing his internship on the farm, and we lived on the farm so we could have 3 meals a day together. And that was really awesome. But that's really hard to do when everyone isn't working from home or in the same space. And so now we have 2 meals a day as a family, and some days get to have 3 meals a day as a family. But trying to really keep that a priority in the midst of schedules that are calling us away from the home is a challenge.
Do you homeschool all of the kids?
I do.
Okay.
And my husband helps a lot as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. So then he's not in this daily grind anymore. He can come and go a little bit more.
A little bit more. He has an unusual schedule. He's working at a nonprofit with at-risk youth. And so it's not a 9 to 5 because someone needs to be with these kids all the time. And so he does a double shift 1 day a week and then 3 evening shifts. So a lot of the time when he's gone is when the kids are already asleep. Oh. And so 3 days a week, he's with us all day. And then he's with us every morning except for 1. So that's pretty
good.
It works really great for us as a homeschool family. It wouldn't make a lot of sense if the kids were in school because they would be in school and then he would be gone when they got home in the afternoon through bedtime. So he wouldn't see very much, but it did well for us because of our circumstances.
It's very cool. So what's besides I guess part of the way it's been eating meals with each other, what's been the easiest one to hold on to, you think?
I think it's probably hospitality, opening up our home and having people over. It's maybe not as easy as it was on the farm because there were other people living on the farm. We could just walk over and knock on their door and say, hey, do you want to come over for dinner? But we do live, we intentionally bought a house in an area where a lot of our friends lived. And so we're kind of 5 minutes away from a lot of people. And so that's been, location wise, it's still been easy to invite people over and build that into our week.
Cool. Yeah, that's actually one of the things. Currently we live outside of Philadelphia, and I moved up here on a whim, not knowing pretty much anybody, about less than 10 years ago. And now my husband grew up here, but left and came back for college. And, but he had a social circle, whether we have some family around here, friends that we've acquired over the past 10 years. And we've thought about moving, but leaving a social circle is difficult. Now that we're Catholic, we know that there is a community that we can always go to once we move, but that's one of the things that keeps keeping me in our location is just, I like having people over that I know. And if we moved, it wouldn't be the same. I don't know.
Yeah, it is. It's always hard to imagine that there could be friends.
I know. It's so silly.
People you care about. Yeah. But it's so true. And you've been investing in that community. And so for Daniel and I, we lived in Tallahassee. That's where all of our family is, in Florida. And then we both went to school here in Texas, went to college in Texas, and then we moved back to Florida before moving to the farm. And so we kind of have these 2 communities that we've invested in. And it is kind of hard to imagine living anywhere else other than those 2 places where we have strong support and friendships and family and all of that.
Yes, especially now that there's kids involved, it makes it harder. I mean, just as a single or just, a couple together, I don't feel like it would be that hard. But man, we've got babysitters and good friends that have been with my son since the day he was born, and we have family, and it was so hard to leave. But we keep.
Yeah, it does make it a lot trickier.
Man, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you're in Texas now. Are you back where you went to school?
Yes, same city where we went to school. We went to Baylor, which is the largest Baptist school in the world, and we became Catholic.
At school?
Daniel had just graduated. I had graduated a couple of years prior, or maybe, a couple of years prior. So I graduated. We're kind of taking turns finishing up school because we got married right after my sophomore year. Very, very young. And so I finished up, we were both in school my senior year. And then I was working at Baylor the year after I graduated, and Daniel was finishing up.
So how do you
18 months after I graduated.
Okay. I grew up, one of my best friends lived in a mixed household. So her dad is Baptist, that whole side of the family is Baptist, and the whole mom side of the family is Catholic. She was raised Catholic. But man, it's very different. How do you go from Baptist to Catholic?
Yeah, I think that for us, I had been drawn to the beauty of the faith for a long time, but didn't really know what to do with that attraction because I had a lot of intellectual obstacles to Catholicism because I had a lot of misconceptions about the church. And so for me, reading the early church fathers, learning what the church actually taught, and kind of having all of those barriers broken down opened up the possibility for me to embrace these longings I'd already had. And then for my husband, his experience was he was more of the reluctant convert, where he didn't really want to become Catholic, but believed that the church had the fullness of truth. And so kind of felt like, to whom will we go? This is the only option now that I know what I know. And so we kind of had different experiences getting there, but it was kind of happening at the same time, which I'm really grateful for, because I know it's really difficult for a couple to be converting at different times and have that be a difficult thing in the relationship. So I'm glad it happened at once, but it was kind of working in different ways for each of us.
That's very interesting. That's similar to how my husband and I were. He was coming back. We were both atheists, pretty firm atheists, and he came through philosophy into theology and Thomas Aquinas, and his mind works in that way. And yeah, I grew up in the Bible Belt, so I had a lot of friends who were pushing the rapture. And I had my dad saying, this is all crap. Don't listen to it. And I was like, well, this is all crap. I'm not going to listen to it. And I remember right before I became a Christian, and it was very shortly after that I became Catholic, I said, I am not going to accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior, and I will never be Catholic. And then like 3 weeks later, I wore a crucifix for the first time. And, oh my God, it felt so heavy on my chest. My ego was just bruised, which that's okay.
It's interesting because I think part of becoming Catholic is the church is for everybody. There's going to be tons of people that aren't like me at all, which is different from my experience as a Protestant, where I felt like I was constantly trying to whittle down what my faith was and who was a part of it. And I didn't want to have to be embarrassed by any people that I thought were weirdos that were in the same faith, And so becoming Catholic, you're just kind of saying, oh, gosh, they let me in. I guess they let anybody in. And some of these other Catholics are going to embarrass me, and I'm going to embarrass them. And we're just kind of all in this together in this messy family. It's a really different experience.
I will say that I'm sure you're right, because we kind of tested out a Lutheran church for a little while, but that just felt pretty lukewarm. But yeah, I thought all religious people were weird. I had really bad experiences with them. I don't know. But it's interesting that you say that, because Catholic, the word Catholic means global.
Right.
So maybe that just has infused, that idea is just really infused. And I think it's that continuity, no matter where you are in the world. You could be in sub-Saharan Africa, you could be in Finland or in America, and you are hearing the same mass celebrated no matter where you are.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the church.
Yeah, that's one of the things my husband was very excited about. He's like, when we travel, we can look at new churches. And it'll all be the same. I was like, okay, calm down. But yes, you're right. Churches are beautiful.
That is so fun, because we love to travel as a family, go on road trips and things like that. And it's so fun to kind of plan out, where do we get to have mass? Can we find, a beautiful Catholic church somewhere along the way? And
I know
it's just neat to feel at home everywhere in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause we tried out a few different Protestant churches, and it was all so different. And we spent more time trying to figure out where we were in the service and what was happening, rather than just participating as you should.
Mm-hmm.
But even now, as much as I was teasing my husband at first, his excitement about this, now I'm the first one, oh, we're going to be in North Carolina. Let's see what church we can go to. And I've already I mapped it all out.
I love it.
So where the book's out, are you currently working on any projects? Do you have any, what's next?
I have an idea for a very, very different project. It would be a fiction children's book project that I'm working on with a friend who is an illustrator. So that is kind of I'm starting to have the brain space to kind of percolate those ideas right now because my baby's finally here and the book is finally released. And so that's something I want to spend some time working on. But I'm also just trying to take a little bit of a breather and enjoy these sweet baby weeks because I mean, she's only 5.5 weeks old and I feel like she looks so different and she looks so big and is starting to lose that, teeny tiny frog-legged newborn look. It's this little chunky baby look and it's, so precious, but it's just going by so fast. So I'm trying to leave space to just enjoy her. And also just get back to doing regular podcasting and regular writing on the blog and some of those smaller projects that have been on the back burner for months.
Sure.
Of book stuff. I think that it's easier for me. I'm an ENFP personality. And so I get excited about a project and then I run out of steam. That's kind of our mantra. And so getting to just work on a blog post and send it out there and it's done is a very enjoyable thing for me, for my personality, not to have that longer, big project that I keep plugging away on. So I'm kind of enjoying getting a little break from that before I jump into the next thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I started with Instagram just because it was this quick, it feels good, right? You actually create something and other people can enjoy it rather than if you're writing a book, it's such a long project that a few people will read here and there, but it's not consumed in its entirety until much later.
Right. Delayed gratification.
Yes. Yeah, that's something. That's a good lesson for everybody, isn't it? Speaking of like a throwaway culture.
Right.
Do you anything left you want to talk about? Any thoughts? I love the book. I'd love to hear. I mean, just spit. Go ahead.
Well, thank you so much. I think that I've been, the book's been out of my hands for a few months, and then there's been this crisis popping up in the church. I mean, the crisis was there, but we didn't know about it as much until this summer, and that's been, I feel like, pretty dark and heavy for everyone. And so as I was flipping through my book, seeing if I remembered what I said. And the last chapter is about finding hope in a dark world. And I was just thinking about how a lot of the things I learned that I put into this book are really applicable right now, because I think a lot of us are waking up to the reality that we really want to become saints and we are called to holiness, and we don't want to just leave the faith up to whatever's going on institutionally. We really want to take ownership of our faith and really restore the church in this time. As lay people, we want to be a part of that redemption and transformation of where the church has really failed. And so I think that that's a really overwhelming task. And so to kind of break that down into a few habits we can take on and this mindset that we can begin putting on the mind of Christ in a way, because I think a lot of us, me included, it's so easy to see through the lens of the throwaway culture because that's what's all around us and that's what we've grown up with. And to really put on the mind of Christ and try to see things through a gospel lens, even if it's just, how am I going to live out my vocation well? I've been thinking about how I want to mother my children, how I want to live out my marriage, that this is the vocation God's called me to. And so how am I going to do that well in a way that will ripple out, from my home to my neighbors, to my community, in a way that will help us all pursue the gospel. And so I think that that's something that's just been on my heart a lot with this crisis, is we have to become saints. This is what we need to do. It's frustrating that we are in this place, but this is the time that God has God has planned us to be here in this time. Kind of, I think about that. What's that Saint Joan of Arc quote where she says, "I am not afraid, I was born to do this." That I think we have to kind of reach for that kind of courage to really rise up in this time that God has placed us here and called us to be saints right now in this difficult time in the church's history. And we can really bring that hope to our communities and our parish communities and our Catholic communities, and just let that ripple out to the rest of the world as we participate in God's redemption of the world. And so that's just what's been on my heart with all of this stuff that's come out this summer. And I think is really something we need to all be aware of and striving for right now.
That's absolutely correct. There's that phrase or that saying, God writes straight with crooked lines. So this has been a really terrible thing. But, I'm a new Catholic. I was only baptized this past Easter. What I've been really struck with is how passionate people have been in saying, I am remaining Catholic because I believe in the true presence of Christ, or I believe in the church. I'm not going to abandon being Catholic because of these terrible things. So it's really interesting to be able to see that even with these tragedies that have come out, that it's almost renewing people's faith even more. They really have to think about why they believe in what they do and be very intentional as they go forth in the future with how they either live the faith or practice the faith, or all, both of those things.
Absolutely. And I think it's waking us up to the idea that we can't leave this pursuit of holiness to someone else or the hierarchy, that we've got to do this now. Not to say, in no way do I mean that the laity is culpable for the sins of predatory clergy or clergy who cover up other clergy's sins. That's definitely not what I mean. But that we can't just rely on this hierarchy, that we have to really pursue holiness as well. And I think that that's something we're kind of realizing, and is helping motivate us to want to become saints.
Yeah, it's twofold. It's pushing for accountability for the people who are guilty, and also making sure that we move the Catholic Church in its entirety forward by being, or at least trying to be, saints. As Mother Angelica said, we're all called to be great saints. Don't miss the opportunity.
Right. Yeah, I love that.
She's great. Mother Angelica is my spirit animal, I think, in some respects. She's much braver than I am in calling people out. But maybe I'll talk about Mother Angelica another day. I don't know. So thank you, Haley. This has been awesome. Anybody who's listening, please pick up Haley's book, The Grace of Enough: Pursuing Less and Living More in a Throwaway Culture. It's out now. Easy to get on Amazon, available on Kindle. Are you ever going to do an audiobook of it? Do we know?
I haven't heard anything from my publisher about that, but I've had a lot of people ask me. I think it's maybe one of those things that they don't do until further down the road, if there's a lot of desire for it. So I think that there's no plans right now, but we'll see what happens.
So listen, and what are the names of your two podcasts, right?
Well, I co-host Fountains of Carrots with Christy Eisinger. And then sometimes I'm a co-host on Tish Oxenreider's podcast called The Simple Show. But that's her podcast, and sometimes she has co-hosts on. But then Fountains of Carrots is Christy and my podcast.
Okay, so if we want to hear you, we'll go there.
Yeah, head over there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Haley. And, catch you next time.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy to understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.